Welcome to this week's REI weekly lesson. I'm Greg Helbeck, and if you've been listening to this podcast or watching this YouTube channel for a while, if you're not familiar with me, I have been a full-time entrepreneur now in the real estate investing business, wholesaling, flipping rentals for almost 10 years. It's crazy to think that back in September of 2015, I decided to become a real estate investor, and boy, it was worth it. So all the information you're going to hear on this podcast and YouTube channel is real world practical knowledge. So if you get value from this channel, do me a favor, subscribe, like it, share it with other people. That's how we keep growing the show and the channel on a weekly basis. Today, I'm going to talk about rolling the dice on a wholesale deal. What do I mean by rolling the dice? I mean, getting a property under contract and seeing if a buyer would want to pay it. Now, number one, do you need to do this in every situation? No, right? The only time as a company that we do this is when we feel like we don't want to buy the house ourselves because of whatever reason. Maybe it's the location, maybe it's the condition, maybe it's the price. And, we think that it might not be a good deal for us, but it could be a good deal for someone else. And we could potentially make some money on it, help the seller out. So, step number one, if you're going to do this, you need to be straight up with the seller about what your intentions are. I see too many wholesalers tell the seller they're going to buy their house and then they never end up buying the house and everyone's pissed off and the potential litigation. So, what we do is if we don't want to buy the house at whatever price or whatever location is, we'll tell the seller, hey, we're not your buyer, but we have a network of buyers we work with. We can probably find someone else to buy this, make a little bit of money. You probably need 5 or 10 days to do that. Is that something you consider or probably not? So, we ask the seller, do we have permission to do this? And if they say yes, we tell them, listen, it's not a guarantee. There's a chance we're going to back out. And this is the risk. Like we could potentially come back to you in 10 days and say, hey, we don't want to buy this. No one wants to buy it from us. No deal. And we let them know what the downside is, right? So they know what's going on. And we also let them know that we are not the ones buying the house. We are the ones wholesaling their house. We don't say the word wholesaling because sellers don't know what that is, but we basically say, we're going to go out and try to find a buyer and make a little bit of money. So if we can get a buyer to pay us more than we're going to pay you, we can make the deal happen and all is good. So you got to disclose this to the seller. This is how wholesalers keep a good reputation, is honest and transparent. So number one, be transparent with your intentions. Number two, you got to know a little bit about the deal regardless. You can't just put out some piece of crap property that makes no sense. Like I just did this the other day on a property. We put it out for 400. The value fixed up is 650 and it probably needs 125 to 150 to get it to be worth 650. So after you figure out the soft costs and everything, it probably could make 50 grand profit. So like it was a decent deal on the surface and we found someone who wants to pay us 400, which is great because we'll make 20 grand. When we do this, we're successful because I'm a buyer myself. I don't just wholesale. I know what the numbers are. I know what the house is going to sell for. I know what the repairs are probably going to be. I understand the soft costs. I understand all that. So it gives me an advantage when I'm trying to sell a wholesale deal. Also, it gives me credibility too, because the buyers know that like I'm an actual flipper myself and landlord. So they kind of know like when I put numbers out there, I'm pretty accurate with the numbers. For example, I put out a property the other day and I put the purchase price, the estimated repairs, all the soft costs in there, which is like usually 50,000 in New York, the sale price, which is very reasonable. And then I put the estimated profit. I think it was like 52 grand. So someone can look at that email, double check the numbers and like make a decision right away. So put that out there on your email, assuming the numbers are accurate, and it'll make it a lot easier to sell the deals on the ones that you're rolling the dice. And now the other lesson I'm going to talk about when it comes to rolling the dice, at least this is particular to like the Northeast New York area. It's very hard to go into contract. So like usually what happens is you get an offer accepted, then you got to go get the attorney involved, and then they got to get the other attorney involved. It's like this whole freaking racket. So what we usually do, at least this is just pertaining to New York, is if we think it's a potential deal, we'll sign it up on a DocuSign option agreement, which is basically like a piece of paper saying that we have the right to buy the house at a certain price and we have a certain timeline to decide. And if we end up getting the deal to a buyer, we have to scramble and actually get the property locked up with a real purchase and sale agreement. That's what gets a little hairy because like the buyer will give us an offer and then we have it under an option agreement, but we don't have it in a purchase and sale agreement. So we have to go out and really quickly get it under contract. And sometimes that can get a little sketchy where like you're waiting a week to get a contract and the buyer's waiting for it. And you're like, hey, it's going to be delayed. So that's a little bit of a downside of it, is a little bit of a pain in the ass to get in a contract. So what I think we're going to start doing now is, if possible, we're going to start to get contingencies in our contracts when we need them, right? In New York, which is hard to do because a lot of the lawyers don't like doing that, but we're going to find a way to make it work. But Try to avoid the option agreement if you can. Like, if you're listening to this and you're not in New York, you're probably, Greg, what are you talking about? Like, you just have a due diligence period. But in New York, usually that's not the case. Like, if it's in Washington or Delaware, we can literally just throw in the purchase and sale agreement. We have a 5 or 10 business day inspection period, the right to find a buyer. We can put whatever you want in there, and it's a valid binding contract. But in New York, it's a little different. So that's kind of a little bit of a bottleneck for us. But we got to get it in some sort of an agreement, right? I see people where, at least in New York, they'll get an accepted offer and they have nothing in sign, not even option, not even a purchase offer. And then they'll like try to send it out and they have no paperwork whatsoever. And you can get in trouble for that because you're basically marketing a property you have no ties with. And then the third thing that I'll tell you is that it's all about your expectations, right? Like every time I put out a property and I don't know if it's a deal or not, and the seller knows the same thing, I expect the worst and hope for the best with the property. Half of the properties we put out work out and they turn into deals and closings. And then the other half, nobody wants them. That's the way it is, right? Usually, the reason is because the price is too high. That's the number one reason wholesale deals don't sell. So here's another nugget for you. If you told the seller in the beginning, you only are going to buy it if you find a buyer. Okay, let's say you agreed to give the seller 500,000, which is crazy, but in New York that's normal, same with Seattle. And you put it out for 530 and every single offer comes back at 500 or the highest and best comes back at 500. At that point, if you want, you could consider asking the seller, "Hey, listen, I found a buyer. It's not at the number I wanted it to be at. I need to make a little bit of money on this. Would you be open to potentially selling it to me for 490 or 480 so we can make the deal happen? Or are you absolutely stuck on 500?" So at that point, you go in, you see if you can make a deal with the seller. But the key is the seller knows in advance it's not a done deal until you have a real contract in place. So just be transparent with the seller. And when you're upfront and honest with people, you'd be surprised how they'll reciprocate for you. So that's what we do when we roll the dice on our wholesale deals. Just to summarize some of those points. Number one, we're very transparent with the seller. Number two, we put the deals out at reasonable numbers. We try to share as much info as we can so it's an easy decision for the buyer. Number three, we always have some sort of piece of paper, whether it's an option agreement or a regular contract in place to protect us. And number four, we have our expectations set correctly and we don't rely on every deal is going to sell because that's not how reality works in this business. So if you got value from this, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. And if you're in New York or Delaware or Reno or San Diego or Seattle and you have a house you want to wholesale to me or wholesale with me, send me an email, greg@velocityhousebuyers.com, or send me an Instagram DM at grego37, and I'll see you on the next REI weekly lesson. Take care.